Okay, so today is our very, very first squabble. As you walked in, you received one of the cards. The cards are significant to us because they just assign you a number, all right? So as we go through the information, or as we go through our squabble, I will randomly generate numbers using random.org, which is up on the board there. And it will take or pull out a name or a number that's on your card, and then that means you have to ask the question or you become a squabble. Does everybody understand how that works? The significance about this is that it regenerates and it uses the number over and over again. So I've had it before in the past where somebody had to talk 5 different times. So it's not one and done. Does everybody understand that? You have your textbook with you, so you can actually use that as a reference tool throughout the process. The people on the outside are what we refer to as a confrontational congregate. Okay? The confrontational congregate has to turn around and ask questions that add to the conversation that's in the middle. All right? So 2 squabblers sit here. We'll pick those in a minute. And then as they discuss the question at hand, you will have to interject if your number comes up on the random.org. Okay? Now, using the criteria that's sitting in front of you on the sheet, that's how you're scored. If you are part of it, and you do what you're supposed to, which is actively listen, actively engage in what's going on, you get a 3. And remember, in here, a 3 is considered what we expect. Okay? If you are called on and you actually say something that stalls the conversation, that means you get a 2, right? The idea is to continue the conversation or to enhance it, okay? If your statement does not make any sense in the context of the discussion, you get a 1, okay? And in reality, what ends up happening, if you're a 2 or a 1, I'll ask you to restate it in a way that makes more sense, okay? If you go up the ladder, a 4 is a question that clarifies the position of a squabbler, so the person in the middle. So you make them uncover even more evidence about what they're saying. A 5 requires new material to be added to the conversation. And then a 6 requires analysis above the discussion and content that is in the book or the reading. Okay? Do you guys understand how the scoring piece works? So the bottom line is I want you to sound intelligent. Okay? What I think, this came about several years ago. The first one, you can see in 2014 is when I first did this. The concern that I had was students being able to have conversations with people and sound intelligent. Okay, one of the skills that you need the rest of your life is to be able to have a conversation with somebody. If you can't have a conversation, you won't be very successful in life. So this doesn't matter if it's in college when you're talking to a professor, working with groups within the class, working in the real world later on. Conversations are very important, and how do you have that conversation without offending people is probably a better key, okay? Or knowing when to offend somebody is also a good situation to be in. Everybody good? So what we want to do, I will stop you and have a conversation or have you reword things or tell you what you did good or help buy time for the squabblers in the middle because they're running out of things to say, okay? But this is about you being able to have a conversation about something other than football or whatever extracurricular you're in, okay? Is everybody on the same page? I will acknowledge that this is very uncomfortable for people. I'm not trying to single you out or anything like that. I'm trying to help. And if you listen to what I say, you're going to end up getting something out of it, okay? So
you only talk when your number is called?
Correct.
Okay.
Unless you're a squabbler.
Then you're just
The squabblers are having a dialogue, a conversation back and forth about whatever the question that's being posed.
Do we switch out squabblers?
We will this time. Sometimes they stay the whole group, but since it's the first one and trying to help you guys understand expectations, we'll have all the squabblers. We'll switch each question. And we'll probably do, I have 6 questions that we can do, probably only get to 3 or 4. Okay? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Just for clarification, the number that's going to be generated is the one we're looking at is this number right here.
Yeah, there's only one number.
I know. It's just,
Okay. Yeah, you guys still haven't used the cards all that much, so, yeah. All right, so, the people who get to join the realm of squabblers, where did that number go? I almost did it wrong, because I almost left out the person. All right, so, number 11 and number 17. Please make your way.
Good luck. Sorry. Where's your number?
I need your card. When you come in, you bring your card, right? So, who was 22? So you take this one now, just because we're reducing the number, and then who was 21? So you get this one. So now we've reduced the number here, and we'll be out of 20 instead of 22. Okay? So the questions will be on the board. Again, we're coming from our textbook reading, all right? You guys see this, and then you start talking. Remember, it's supposed to be a dialogue. Discuss the components of an ecosystem.
If I remember correctly, you have, I don't remember the proper names, you have like fauna, like animals.
You have to remember that you're talking to everybody here, so you have to enunciate a little bit more. All right? Conversation's here, but everybody needs to hear. You were spot on in what you were saying, so keep going.
So like, in an ecosystem, there are like multiple parts. You have like the fauna, which is animals, flora, plants. You have water and other like inert like elements and stuff like mix in within everything and kind of connect it all. And I think it's kind of interesting how like everything sort of like cycles back into each other.
I agree. I think that like not all parts of the ecosystem would work if not like all were like in there. Do you know what I mean? Like in order for like one part of the ecosystem to work, the other one needs to be there.
Yeah, like I can't recall a specific case, but there are plenty of cases in which like a certain species of animal like lowers in population and causes the entire ecosystem to kind of like bend in a way that isn't normal for it.
Yeah, and that could also help too, because like if there's like an overpopulation of some animal, it could be eating like different parts of the ecosystem, like plants, and therefore if like other parts of the ecosystem took that population down, it could actually help other parts.
Right, and like there's this sort of natural like ebb and flow of populations as deer population rise, wolf population becomes bigger because it eats the deer, and thus making the deer population smaller, but because the deer population is smaller, the wolves can't sustain themselves, so their population gets smaller, allowing the deer to cost more.
I don't think either of you have talked about the components, right? Would you guys agree with that, competition congregate? So you haven't said anything incorrect, but you weren't addressing the question. So number 3, can you get them back on track?
Okay. You want me to ask him a question?
That's when number 3 gets called out.
Yeah,
You don't have to say, that's me, and you don't have to say, do you want me to ask?
Talk about the components.
So try to get them back on track, yes.
So, you talked about animals and plants, sort of, I think things. Can you expand on that to make the classification more broad? If that's, I would assume what the components are.
Right.
Wait, reword the question. Because I think you could say it simpler.
Can you broaden your classification of the components?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I mean, there are different parts of like the animal and plant kingdom that sort of like all perform their specific duties within the ecosystem.
Pause. You're going down the wrong path already. What's the answer you're trying to get them to?
Should I just say it?
Yeah.
Biotic and abiotic?
So that's where you want to be up the scale. So now how would you ask a question that got these guys back to abiotic, biotic? Right? Because you knew the answer, right? So now the question is, how do I ask a question and get them to the answer? Does anybody have a suggestion? I don't know if that would do it, because that was a question that was already here.
If you have to divide all the components into 2 different categories, how would you do it?
what are the two major categories of an
Okay.
ecosystem?
That makes sense.
Right.
Okay, so why don't we have you ask that question again, and let's see if these guys can go with it.
What are the two major categories of components in the ecosystem?
Wait, that's kind of stalls, it is, that's exactly right, but it stalls the conversation. What are biotic and abiotic? So how can you make the conversation continue? Try it again.
Discuss the roles of the two major components of an ecosystem.
Identify and discuss.
Identify and discuss. The two major roles of components of an ecosystem.
Well, we know we have abiotic and biotic components in the ecosystem. So abiotic kind of supplies the biotic component with a lot of the necessities and like specific like individual elements and stuff that allow them to perform their various tasks that we learned with the micro and macronutrients of the plant that are all abiotic within the environment that allows the plant to live and then perform its duty to affect other biotic features and eventually the abiotic world.
I agree. I don't know what else more to say about them, but I mean, without the abiotic, there's not really biotic, I guess.
And I think, like, for instance, when it comes to like things like decomposers like fungus and various like bacteria and insects, that a lot of biotic components are influential to the abiotic part because energy can become trapped within a biotic system, and without being decomposed properly, it'll never return to the abiotic system and then thus repeat the cycle.
5.
So you guys are sort of discussing about how abiotic obviously compares with biotic, but I want to ask you, how might these components of an ecosystem, like, how could they be changed or affected in a way, things like this? So what factors might change or maybe like defer certain biotic and abiotic components?
Obviously, like, how we were talking about, like, animals, I guess they could, like, affect the biotic part of the ecosystem. And if those aren't there, then there's not going to be any abiotic.
And humans are also part of the biotic part of the ecosystem. So, like in the case with Mono Lake and the biotic part, humans affecting the abiotic environment, which is the water there, and that diverting it away, it caused the Mono Lake to become extremely salty and affected other biotic creatures who use that lake for sustenance and as a respite during travel. So it's kind of interesting to see how those two are so easily sort of flipped on their heads by each other.
It's just like the chapter 301 when talking about Haiti too, on how like all like reforestation was like cut down.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think about how a lot of that has to do with like deep-rooted issues in the biotic part rather, where like because of the maybe not issues precisely, but like because of the economic situation within Haiti, they had to cut down trees to get their charcoal and wood because they couldn't afford anything else.
And that can affect that.
Right.
Good. I really like your question. All right, I think you did a good job answering or posing it. Do you think they answered it?
Somewhat. I think I could have reworded it saying like, what might these factors depend on? So I was trying to go for, I was trying to be able to lean towards like, the climate, about how different climates also obviously support different components.
And I think by being more specific with your question, it would be leading them into that conversation. I think the two of you used your textbook as a reference very well, right? Because you're showing that you read those pieces and you were elaborating on those pieces, and that's good. So, but I think we missed getting to this. So if number 17 can try to steer us back on track. It's still the question because we really haven't dove into the idea of components, have we?
We talked about how, like, we defined both biotic and abiotic components, I stated, like, by the question stated earlier. but like one part of the ecosystem that's really important is their interactions. So my question is, how does the interactions between the two components define the boundaries of an ecosystem?
I really like how you rephrased what was said, and then you posed your question on top of that. And what I'm doing was just buying them a little bit of time so they can compose their thoughts before they answer.
Okay.
All right, you guys got something?
Can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry.
Okay, so basically, how does the interactions of the biotic and abiotic components define the boundaries of the ecosystem?
Well, the interactions are very important between them, and that can affect like a lot of things. Like kind of like how we were talking about with like our examples about like the lakes in Haiti, and like when you cut those trees out, or you defer the water, it's gonna have, and those interactions are definitely gonna have like huge effects on our ecosystem. Of what we further read about them, about like how they got all salty and.
You haven't said anything wrong, but you have not said anything that means anything yet.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that statement? You feel it,
I'm
don't
kinda-
you?
yeah,
Because
I'm
you just
kinda
keep on going and going and going. All right? So you had a re-clarification of the question. I think that's good. Do you want to try it again, or should we let Kenny?
I'm gonna let my Kenny take that.
All right, what? Can you try it?
By boundaries, I assume like.
Don't talk to me. I didn't ask the question.
Do you mean like more physical boundaries, like specifically like, for instance, in this case, you mean like deforestation, the amount of, say, animals that depend on the forest for their sustenance decrease because of that effect on their boundary in which they can live.
Sure.
But like, in chapter what we were, like in the section that we're rereading for this question, it was talking about boundaries, not necessarily, like, not just physical boundaries, but basically how do you tell the differences between like different ecosystems? Like if there's two ecosystems next to each other, how do you tell the difference? And if so, if there is a difference, can the, like, is the way that you tell the difference is like, sorry, let me rephrase that question. How can you tell the differences between different ecosystems, as well as how does that classification differ among different types of ecosystems?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with conditions. I mean, obviously, we can, from the top of my head, a rainforest is very, very different from tundra. So climate affects it, in which, because it's up north, farther from the equator, it gets colder. And so certain plants aren't able to live in that environment. Certain biotic parts aren't able to interact with the abiotic part of that environment properly because they can't sustain themselves. However, in cases like, for instance, the Sahara Desert, there are plenty of plants that have adapted to work with the abiotic part and become sustainable in those conditions.
Exactly. Just how like you're not gonna see like a lot more plants in like a really dry area.
Right.
You're gonna see a lot more plants in the, like where you got rain and nice soil.
But even still, you're going to see plants, which I think is
Yeah, that have
probably like
adapted.
the most
Very
important part, is that because of how they've learned to interact with each other
Mhm.
over the course of many years, the biotic part of, say, the Sahara Desert has learned to interact with all the harsh things to do with the abiotic part about the Sahara Desert, and thus has developed to be kind of harmonious with it, where like bushes grow in such a way that they are able to survive, cactuses grow in such a way
And
that
they're able to live like in
Animals,
situations.
have adapted to be able to, snakes dig under the sand to keep themselves cool during the day.
I'm going to stop you there. Did you guys feel the conversation feel a little bit better as you went through it?
Yeah.
Were you were uncomfortable at the very beginning, weren't you?
Very comfortable.
And you were not, were you?
I was very.
Kenny.
You were uncomfortable?
Yes.
Oh, you did a good job hiding it. I didn't think you looked uncomfortable. The key about this is about you guys having the opportunity to do this, all right? Was it that painful? But it was uncomfortable, and I appreciate the two of you being the first ones. We're going to switch two more in and ask another question. All right, so grab the cards from the two people, number 10 and number 8. So grab their cards.
All right.
already started.
So
having
again, the reason for
conversations.
this is to help us build that confidence of having those conversations, right? And being able to do it. And you could tell as the two of them were working through it, the conversation was getting better. All right, I don't know if we quite hit on all the components of the ecosystem and the way we should have, but I think the conversation was better as we went through it. All right, so here we will pose the next question. That's the last question.
Okay, so
Squabble.
usually the energy flow starts with the sun, and the sun provides like the main energy source, and the sun gives energy to plants, which gives energy to primary consumers that eat the plants, and the plants are the producers. And then it kind of like goes down the line, so the secondary consumers will eat the primary consumers, and the tertiary consumers will eat the secondary consumers.
Right, and then like energy is transferred in that sense because, I mean, I remember the textbook was saying how about like only like from the sun, only like almost 1% of the energy actually even gets to the plants. And I think that's almost crazy thinking about how much energy we're losing to heat in itself, and still, even with just 1% going to the plants, we're still able to sustain such a high level ecosystem with so many different levels of food webs. It's very interesting how 1% can sustain so much. So imagine if we were able to harness that energy a little bit better, how much more we could do with our energy consumption, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how like it kind of eventually like diminishes. So like by the time like it's kind of all like a big cycle. So by the time like an animal dies, you have like decomposers that come through and can like get energy from like dead animals basically. It's just I think it's interesting how it's like a cycle, but like also a lot of energy can be lost. But,
So I'm going to pause you there just momentarily. Do you see how that's a conversation? They were actually going back and forth. And even Maggie's pause on that was because she was waiting to hear the last part of what you said to be able to respond back. All right? So my applause to you guys on that. That's actually very good. The content that you were discussing was very good. Number 3, can you add to the conversation?
So, section 1, which is talking about, discuss the impact of the efficiency of energy transfer of trophic levels on food ecosystem.
So, and you were actually prepping your question as they were talking, all right? The key is to make sure that that carries along with the last part of their conversation. So what some people want to do is write down a question and then be able to have it. The reason why a squabble is so powerful is because you can't really do that, all right? Because you may have an idea of what you're going to ask, but when you're called on, you have to be able to twist it to fit the conversation that was there. Does that make sense? Okay, and I think yours fits in, but do you want to say that again because I have a monopoly?
I said, discuss how the efficiency of energy transfer in the trophic levels of the ecosystem. Hold on a second, let me rephrase that. I said, discuss how the efficiency impacts the energy transfer between trophic levels and ecosystem.
Stop looking at your notes or whatever you're looking at and say it.
Again?
Yeah.
Discuss how the efficiency of energy transfer impacts the ecosystem.
I think in some ways when you transfer energy, as you can see normally with like the biomass pyramids and stuff like that, there's a lot of like, you have quite a few producers, and because some of the bigger like upper levels of trophic levels, I guess some of the other upper level consumers will, since they're bigger in size just in general, they will consume more. Therefore, that's where you kind of see with the biomass pyramid that there's probably less number of like some of the higher level consumers than in comparison to plants. Like I mean, you see like thousands of plants, but I mean, and even then, there's still like 7 billion humans. And if we're considered one of the top line, that shows like quite the diversity that we have in our ecosystem in our world, for that matter.
Right, I definitely agree. There's always a lot of producers in an ecosystem, but like I wouldn't say they have, it's a lot, but they don't have the most like energy. Like there's a lot of them, but there's not the most energy. And as it like moves up, like if you're at the highest, they're like the biggest and require the most energy, but there's not like a lot of like them, there's not a lot of population of them. So like as you move down, you kind of get like as you move up, the animals require more and more energy.
Pause. Do you guys think they've answered the question that was asked?
Mhm.
You know, the question was about efficiencies between the levels. Did they answer that? Right, because the question was talking about how the efficiency, have you guys spoken about the efficiency? You've spoken about how cool it is that we can sustain our life with this and how much the producers are so much bigger so their population is big, but you haven't spoken about the efficiency of it yet. So you've diverted from the question. So let's get back to the question and talk about the efficiency between levels.
Okay, so I think another thing to do with the efficiency between levels would be the net I forget, it was NPP, I forget exactly what it stands for, but, and GPP. So like, it's kind of talking about how, the NPP is kind of talking about how much energy is able to be transferred to the next trophic level.
Yeah.
Whereas the GPP is how much you're able to like produce, and like with plants in that case would be through photosynthesis, how much you can produce, how much biomass you can produce, and how much you can carry on to the next trophic level, and how much energy in that sense can you give through like carbohydrates and starches and such, that when you eat them, you get the energy.
Yeah, I think that the efficiency, like, it slowly like diminishes as it goes on and on. So like the NPP is like that's the net, and that's like that's subtract, like when you subtract like how I think it's like when you subtract the gross is the whole thing, and that is when you subtract it from that thing.
Respiration.
Yeah, respiration. Yeah, I know that's
Well, you guys gotta keep
I
on
remember
talking about
one
efficiency.
example in the book that when it was talking about plants was that it was saying, I think it was 40 to 60%, if I'm not mistaken, and it was talking about how like 40% moves on and 60% kind of stays back, which kind of actually, in my opinion, gets me a little confused on that, because it says 40 to 60, but then I know the general rule is like 10% of energy carries on, so there's kind of like a discrepancy, and I'm sure it's because there's different like ways of measurement. But I find it interesting how it's different in that case, that like maybe what causes one thing to be higher than the other.
Yeah, I definitely think, I think the efficiency could be better, but I don't really know how we could improve upon that.
I think that's interesting. I've been wanting to say this for a while, but I think in that sense you could also kind of consider going back to us as like we're probably like tertiary consumers. But if we try to, I'm not saying like we don't eat plants at all, but like I'm saying in that sense that if we were able to become almost primary consumers, like vegetarians, vegans, they technically are getting more energy out of what they eat than someone that has to go several levels up.
The efficiency.
Yeah, so the efficiency increases in what you get as a human if you are going from the lower levels because you're getting more out of it.
Right.
That was a spot-on statement. I have to compliment you on what you said about humans eating lower in the trophic levels, because that is true. Because you do lose the energy as you go up, and that's one of the big concerns about people being red meat eaters, right? Because it takes a lot of energy to raise, whether it's a buffalo or whether it's a cow, to be able to have that. If you were to be eating grains, it would take less energy to do. It's an interesting point. Number 8.
Alright, so you guys were talking about humans a little bit there at the end, and you're talking about the efficiency of the energy flow. And do you guys think that humans, like, do they affect the energy flow in a positive or a good way?
That's a great question.
Do you positive or negative way?
Yeah, or like, do you think they affect the energy flow in a good or a bad way?
Oh, okay.
Well, and I'm going to warn you on something. What is defined as good? What is defined as a bad? When you use relative terms like good, bad, better, it's really, really hard to understand what you mean by it.
So, I
Would
can say
you?
a positive and a negative?
Well, what do you mean? You might want to explain what you mean by a positive and a
Right, so
negative.
like-
So is it an increase in efficiency, a decrease in efficiency?
Yeah, as a positive it would be like,
Do you understand where I'm talking about now?
Yeah.
Right? Because good, better, best is always one of those conditional pieces, right? It's always relative to something else. And what does that relative mean? It might not be the same frame of reference. Okay, so say it again.
so do you think humans affect the energy flow of the ecosystem in a good way, as in like it's good, efficient, or like in a bad way, or as in like it really like